moving infrastructure from on-premise to cloud, even if it's cost-effective, has so many problems that it's almost infinitely large.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 207. What did it take to bring SQreamDB to SaaS? Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. We hear about people bringing products to market, especially to the cloud. And we just think, how hard can it be? We just open up an AWS account, put my code out in AWS, and life goes on. Victor, is it ever that simple?
Yeah, for the first customer, sometimes, maybe. Then you start thinking about multi-tenancy and what do I do when I have more than one? What do I do when I have more than 100? How does that work? How do they separate? How do we avoid things crashing down? Yeah. I mean, when I say it's that easy, it's that easy compared to day two operations. It's not really easy, but it becomes harder.
Yeah, it becomes a lot harder. And on today's show, we have Yaniv on from SQream. That is SQream. Yaniv, how you doing?
Great. How are you guys?
Very, very good. As a company, SQream primarily has focused on databases over its life. But recently, SQream made an acquisition of Panoply, which Yaniv was the CEO of and now is the VP of SaaS at SQream. When Panoply launched, it was pure SaaS. So you've been playing in the SaaS space, but now SQream is trying to bring a SaaS product to market. And we know a lot of listeners, some work on bringing SaaS, whether it's paid SaaS or whether it's just a company bringing a feature to their customers. What has it been like for you in 2023 building out a SaaS? Because I'm assuming, when did Panoply start? What was that like? And then compare that to what has changed over time to make it either better or worse.
It's a good question. So, a bit about Panoply and a bit about SQream, right? In terms of the differences of the products, just so we can understand where the different challenges, right? So Panoply, in essence, was formed in order to enable people who are not code savvy to build a large, scalable, very modern data architecture in a very simple way, and basically enhance or empower them by enabling this infrastructure to access analytics. SQream is a database. SQreamDB is a database. Historically, that's its core product. Very high-touch database, which is built for extreme data usage. So for the kind of high-end use cases of data, like petabytes of data, and very complex types of queries and stuff like that. When we built Panoply, and we founded Panoply in, I think, beginning of 2016, we actually built Panoply for the same reason Panoply was now acquired by SQream about a year ago. And that is to kind of SaaSify what was then cloud databases, and today is, SQreamDB. And what I mean to SaaSify, I basically mean lower barriers to adoption, if that makes sense.
Basically, it's no code for data analytics.
Right. So I wouldn't say it's like no code, but it's low code. Today, data analysts, some of them are no code, some of them do not know code. But most of them know SQL, that's the language of analytics. And some of them even go deeper and already know Python, right? If you want to do some sort of workflow management, you got to know Python. So today, analysts are much more code savvy than they were in the past. But you're right. It's low code.
So in 2016, when you started, what was it like building that?
In 2016, it was kind of like the days where Amazon Redshift was the go-to cloud database. And it was growing crazy. It was like the fastest growing product that AWS has ever shipped out. We said, all right, let's try to, see how we can assist with adoption of this database, which was, at least, in our perspective, a fantastic gift to developers because it offset a lot of the challenges that customers had utilizing the on-prem databases that they were used to prior to that. Or even the cloud ones that were there, like they were still very, very high touch. And Redshift was significantly lower touch than the others. So the time it takes you to build the database and start utilizing it for analytics was significantly lower. And also some of the core challenges you had with adopting data specifically for analytics users, like scaling and optimization of compute resources, you kind of didn't have that, or you had it to a lesser extent with Redshift. So it was a fantastic product. And what we said is that, like in Panoply, our mindset was it's a fantastic product for developers that kind of know what's going on with databases. But from an analytics perspective, most analysts, at least back then, and still today, I think, didn't really deal with databases. They didn't really know what database was underneath the hood. So we said, let's utilize the best database out there and then build some sort of layer on top of it that automates the utilization of it, like setting it up and scaling it up and optimization of all its resources. And we'll do that automatically so the company can focus on getting its insights. And Panoply, by the way, still does that today on more databases, and it does it to a deeper extent, goes into deeper features, but it still does that today. And you asked how difficult it was very, very difficult. Because when we came to kind of solve the problem and we started talking to Amazon, and we said, guys, you have this great product. We have a product that simplifies the usage of the database with Redshift. And we think that what it can do is that it can enable more consumption of this database with a larger audience, a kind of non-developer audience. And they kind of shook us off. They were like, nah, Redshift is SaaS. And we said, yeah, Redshift is SaaS to an extent, but there are different levels of SaaS. If you need to have people that are completely dedicated to optimizing the resources on the cloud database, which was the equivalent of connecting the wires in the on-prem racks, then it's still not very, very simple to use. And they said, no, it's SaaS, it's very simple to use, and it's great. And we had some sort of partnership with Redshift, and we had the good partnership with AWS, but we kind of never got their ears to the deeper extent that we wanted. And then, at least from my perspective, which is a very biased perspective as a CEO of that company, but at least to my perspective, what happened is that because of that, Amazon missed the, call it Snowflake window, and allowed other competitors like Snowflake and Google BigQuery to come in and provide a much SaaSier, we'll call it, product in terms of its ability to manage the underlying infrastructure. I don't know if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense because from my perspective, AWS, among the big three clouds, AWS, Google, Azure, AWS operates on lower levels than the other two, right? Which gives you, if you really know what you're doing, more flexibility and more control than using others. But I'm yet to find somebody who says AWS is easy. It's not. They really have trouble, at least from my perspective, bringing in services in a real sense of words, right? AWS gives you building blocks. Hey, you want a database? Easy. You just create a subnet and a VPC and internet gateway and 57 other things, and then you put database inside of all that, and there you go, right? Which I'm not now entering into discussion whether that's good or bad, but that's much lower level, at least from my perspective, than the other providers.
Yeah, and at least back then, you're absolutely right. Initially, when that product came out, like specifically Redshift, when that product came out, it was a blast, right? Because compared to the other offerings you had, You didn't need to buy hardware to have like multiple databases. It was fantastic. But then we realized, because we were very big users of Redshift in the previous company we worked at, me and my co-founder, and we realized there were a couple of very, very challenging things you needed to do with Redshift in order to scale your data applications. It may sound kind of stupid today, but there were things like handling materialization, like materialized views. And there were things like scaling the cluster up, right? And the process of scaling the cluster up back then was a huge problem. You literally had a feel, it wasn't really like that, but you had a feel of downtime. It wasn't really downtime, but for the developer, it was the feel of downtime. You had to copy to a different database, and only once it's copied, it was a big mess. So, we came to Amazon, we said, look, we could do these things, right? We had this technology underneath the hood where the developer basically scaled their cluster infinitely without any feel of hiccup or downtime or any offset cost or whatever. We had this job system that managed the process of utilizing the materialized views, so it affected performance in a very good way, which was also one of the big problems, like the queue for Redshift. I think those types of problems, and for them, and by the way, I completely understand why, because when you're inside the office or the cubicle and you're in charge of the fastest growing product in history, then you're like, everything is fine, right? You don't want to change anything. But then that's a classic innovator's dilemma that allows other competitors to come in and take over these problems.
So that was 2016. And you had a good run. You got acquired in 2022. And now you're building another SaaS. So what are the differences now in 2023, building a product, getting a product to market, as compared to what you were doing in 2016?
So from a philosophical perspective, there's no difference. You're taking something that is very, very high touch or something that is high touch to an extent, and you're kind of lowering the touch. There's a huge difference in the details. Back in 2016, when we built out Panoply, we built out, I think you could kind of, what is now called, I think Gartner calls it, data fabric, right? So we built out a managed data fabric on top of Redshift, basically. When we came over to SQream, we were tasked with the team, right? With taking the SQream product, which is the SQreamDB product, which is a very high-touch product, and bringing that over to cloud. And part of the challenge of bringing it over to cloud is the kind of SaaSification, like making it more SaaS, meaning making it lower touch. But there's a very fine line in terms of, like you said before, like no code or low touch or medium touch, high touch. There's a very fine line between what kind of low touch do my end customers need, and the kind of low touch that the SQream customers will need is different than the low touch that the Panoply customers will need. So it all starts from the customer need. Maybe I'll kind of say a small thing about the SQreamDB so we can understand the differences. SQreamDB is a database that its claim to fame is that it utilizes GPU instances very, very efficiently. Basically, what that means is that it's able to throw a lot of raw power onto specific tasks. What they were able to do is take these GPU instances and format them in a way that they're used very efficiently for solving analytical problems. Because they were able to do this, what SQreamDB solves, or what it's aimed as, is to solving the very top complex problems that exist for companies like manufacturing companies or telco companies, right? Or ad tech companies, like companies that are at the very, very edge of data utilization, like that have the very, very most complex use cases. Panoply was completely different in that aspect. We sold to SMBs, and we sold to medium-sized companies who are already on cloud and are using their day-to-day analytics, right? So very, very different customer. And Redshift went to that customer as well. So in terms of that challenge, the challenge right now is more challenging because we are coming to a database that was formed on-premise. We need to go through the hurdle of moving it to cloud. And then we need to go over another hurdle of making it in some sort of way low touch, but low touch to an extent that those end users that are still the top users or are at the edge of cloud computing utilization will want to use it. Those types of customers, unlike the Panoply type of customers, they don't, at least from our perspective, they don't want no code. They don't even want low code. They want to code. They want to build their stuff, right? They want to build their infrastructure.
So with that in mind, SQreamDB is targeted at enterprises, not SMBs. So how has it been for you, having been an SMB and medium primarily, now coming in and trying to build a SaaS around something that I'm going to say very grossly overgeneralized is sort of out of what your wheelhouse has been for the past 6-7 years?
No, you're right. I mean, in Panoply, we did have some enterprise customers, but they weren't our core target audience. In SQream, their core target audience are not even the enterprise. It's like the peak of the enterprise, right? Who have these massive utilizations. So on the one hand, it was a learning curve. I'll give you an example. In Panoply, our type of marketing and sales that we do is low-touch sales, right? Inbound marketing, low-touch sales. So the whole process of prospect to customer is approximately 3 weeks. Enterprise sales is very, very different. And the process of how do you approach a customer? How do you understand their need? How do you understand their pain? And then understanding who is your champion in the organization and who will be the actual person paying in the organization. These are totally like complete different aspects in these two companies. And there was some sort of learning curve. And around that learning curve, we also built out the product or are building out the product in a way that will serve these types of customers or their types of needs. It's much bigger capabilities in terms of customizations. An example, in Panoply, there are a lot of decisions around the configurations of the database that we took in order to make the process very, very simple. So we took consideration. And then, afterwards, maybe the customer can either come over to Panoply and change it or they can do it by themselves. But in some cases, they can't, right? It's decisions that we took and you can't change them. There's no way that in an enterprise product, you will take any decision around database configuration. They have to do it by themselves. They have to be able to do it by themselves. And if it takes a long time, we're going to help them do it. We're going to build it out with them. And the process of selling is not going to take 3 weeks. It's going to take 3 months. And if it's a bigger customer and the use case is more complex, it's going to take 6 months and maybe more. So I think, understanding the customer was probably the kind of first thing that I did, understanding the way SQream works in terms of its sales process and how it talks and gets feedback from their customers were the first things we did before we touched anything that had to do with productization and technology. After we understood that, or at least, we thought we understood, we think we understood it to the extent a human can understand something. Once we understood that, then we started working on the productization. After we worked on the productization, we derived the changes that need to happen from a technical perspective. Each one of these processes, those three, the ones that I just mentioned, the three kind of pillars, each one of them was a learning curve, not only for me, but for the company itself. Because you asked, how did I approach something that was out of my wheelhouse? But from a company perspective, from the SQream perspective, SQream had to approach a new type of offering that was completely out of its wheelhouse. To someone from the outside, looking at someone who has, a database or infrastructure on premise, and then wants to move their infrastructure to the cloud, it seems like there are a couple of problems that you need to overcome, and you do it. And it's a solvable problem. But there's a fact. I think you guys had a show about this. Like the 2 shows before this was a show of why companies still have legacy infrastructure. That's one of the core problems. Moving infrastructure from on-premise to cloud, even if it's cost effective, has so many problems that it's almost infinitely large. And for a company that's developing a database from on-premise, and then developing a cloud database, there are so many challenges around that from a psychological perspective that you need to overcome that, if I needed to do this again in a different company, I don't even know if I'd remember all of them, like be able to outline all the specific challenges that are needed to overcome. Most of them, by the way, are psychological, not necessarily technical.
So at this point, you're close to launching this new product. In fact, it may have already launched depending on when you're listening to this. Thinking about, I'm going to take us back to 2016 and the 2023 one more time. Now, I know you're product and not engineering, but from what you're hearing from engineering, what have been the biggest tech changes you've seen or you've been hearing about from engineering that has made life easier, made life worse, moving through these past 7 years in respect to actually building out a SaaS?
I think one of the biggest revolutions we've had in the past 7 years is Kubernetes, right? So Kubernetes enables the movement to cloud to be much more secure, much, easier from a kind of code management perspective. So Kubernetes, on the one hand, made everything much more difficult because you had to go through Kubernetes. On the second hand, it actually made things much more manageable on the cloud. Like, you can't go over there without it. But the process of kind of Kubernetesizing everything in the company was as close to possible as hell. It was a very lengthy process, and it was very, very challenging. Now that we're after it, we're very happy and things are great, but the process itself was very, very challenging.
It also made things less dependent on specific provider, because now there is a standardized layer, call it Kubernetes, sitting on top of some cloud that is more or less, I'm not going to say completely, but more or less the same, no matter whether you are in AWS or Azure or anywhere else, right?
You're absolutely right. And I'll give you an example. In Panoply, we were on AWS, wanted to add another cloud environment, and we didn't have Kubernetes back then. So we had to go through the process of putting everything, wrapping everything with Kubernetes. It took us months, like almost a year, to wrap everything in different sprints. And once we did that, the process itself was fairly easy. In SQream, we're already past the process of putting everything in Kubernetes, and we're launching. The initial launch is on one cloud provider, right? It's on Google Cloud. And we're already in talks with a second cloud provider to put our new data lake on top of that provider. And the process itself is going to take about a month, right? In terms of moving the new data lake to another provider.
So as we're wrapping up, if people wanted to check out SQream, that's at SQream.com. That's SQream. It's like Scream SC, but SQ, sort of a play on SQL, if you will. I wish we had more time to talk about SQreamDB. We have to have somebody back on to talk about database on GPUs. That just sounds very interesting, especially now that there's a lot of GPUs left over after the great crypto blowup.
In terms of the CPU versus GPU, that's a whole different discussion, which I think could be very, very interesting. But just there's been in the past couple of months, all of a sudden OpenAI and the whole ChatGPT kind of came out, and it kind of started exploding. And around that, when ChatGPT came out, the third version, they had to slow down queries and they had to limit the amount of people that are using it at the same time because of the high computational challenges they had. So this whole CPU GPU challenge is, I think we're coming to a point where we are going to be constrained by physical hardware at this point. And then, SQream's technology in terms of its ability to utilize GPU in a cost-efficient manner for analytical purposes is going to be very, very important for this next stage of AI evolution. But maybe it's a totally different discussion, but I think it's interesting because I think we're entering a new realm in terms of CPU, GPU usage, or general computational around AI.
And you're not saying that you're AI, so let's not go there.
Yeah, we're not AI, but we're a database, and the AI do run over a database. right? We're not AI. We're completely not AI, but AI is going to be utilizing databases. So it is going to be a challenge.
It's always refreshing to have people like, oh, no, we're not AI. We might be ML, but we're not AI.
No.
And you're not even saying you're ML. You're a database.
Yeah.
It's even better.
We're not.
We're a database.
Whereas far as like we don't have any smarts in our brains, like we're not AI. But one of the things that people seem to forget that AI runs on something, right? And it needs to get its information from somewhere. Efficient processing is going to be a very, very lucrative need when this new AI age begins. And I think we're in the beginning of it.
So, Yaniv, if people wanted to reach out and talk some more about this with you, what's the best way to do that?
Through my email, yanivl@screamtech.com. That's probably best.
And we'll have all the contact information down in the show notes. Yaniv, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, guys.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.